I still remember how it felt. That moment when Director Vance Harrington looked up from my proposal, the one I'd spent 4 months perfecting, and asked, "Did anyone actually approve you bringing this to me?" Like I was some stray dog that had wandered into the boardroom. Then he laughed. Actually laughed, looked around at the other executives, and closed my portfolio without even reading past the first page. I take a sip of water, my hand still shaking slightly at the memory. Everyone at the table looked away. Nobody made eye contact. 4 months of work dismissed in 20 seconds, and not a single person stood up for me. 15 years building my career, and in that moment, I was nothing. I remember smiling. "Isn't that weird?" I smiled and said, "Thank you for your time," and walked out with my shoulders back, head high. It wasn't until I reached the bathroom that I threw up. Twice. Sorry for starting so intensely. I'm Thea Lockwood, 34 years old, and at that point, senior creative strategist at one of the biggest media companies in the country. Or I was, until that meeting 6 months ago. I tuck my hair behind my ear, settling deeper into my chair. You know what's funny? I knew he'd reject it. I knew Vance would dismiss my work without reading it. I'd spent 4 months on that proposal, yes, but I'd spent 3 years studying him, the way he operated, the way he destroyed careers, especially women's careers. I wasn't just another victim. I was the bait in my own trap. Before I go deep into this, if you're really interested in knowing what happened next, could you please give this video a like? Also subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to get notified when we upload new videos like these. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because honestly, what happened next still feels surreal even to me, and I lived it. Let me back up a little. Vance Harrington wasn't just any director. He was the director of content at our company. The golden boy who'd been recruited from a top competitor 3 years earlier. The man with the magic touch who could predict trends and deliver hits. The untouchable genius who doubled our market share in 36 months. He was also the man who'd systematically pushed out 7 female executives since his arrival. 7. All of them suddenly underperforming after years of stellar reviews. All replaced by men from his previous company. All gone within weeks of challenging one of his decisions. Renata Okafor was the first. Senior VP of Development with 20 years of experience. Gone 3 months after Vance arrived. Then came Mei Lin, our head of international markets. Then Paula. Then Whitney. Then Jessamine. The list went on. The company didn't see a pattern, or didn't want to see it. But I did. Because I was watching. Because I'd seen men like Vance before. Men who smile at you in the hallway while plotting to erase your existence. My friend Lila Nazari was number 6. She'd been my mentor since I started at the company. The one who saw potential in me when I was just an assistant with big ideas. The woman who'd fought for my promotions, who'd taught me to speak up in rooms full of men determined not to hear me. I pause, feeling my throat tighten. Lila had flagged concerns about inconsistencies in Vance's reporting. Nothing accusatory, just questions about numbers that didn't add up. 2 weeks later, she was called into HR. They said her position was being eliminated in a restructuring. 11 years at the company, ended in a 15-minute meeting with a severance package and an NDA she had to sign to get it. She called me that night, sobbing. Not just because of the job, though that was devastating enough, but because of what Vance whispered to her as she packed her office. Learn to play nice or don't play at all. Like she was a child he was punishing. Not an accomplished executive asking legitimate questions. Lila was brilliant, driven, principled. After she left, she couldn't get interviews at any major companies in our industry. Somehow, word had spread that she was difficult, not a team player. 3 months later, she moved back to her hometown to live with her parents. 6 months after that, I stop, taking another sip of water, blinking rapidly. She took her own life, left a note saying she couldn't see a future anymore, that her identity had been tied to her work, and without it, she felt empty, worthless. I found out at my desk, from a text message from her sister. I remember staring at my computer screen for hours, unable to move. I remember Vance walking past, stopping to ask if I was making progress on the quarterlies. I remember nodding, smiling. I remember deciding, in that moment, that he would pay. But how do you take down someone like Vance Harrington? He was protected by a board that saw him as their golden ticket, by an industry that worshipped his success, by a system designed to believe men like him over women like me. You don't attack directly. You don't challenge openly. You study, you watch, you learn, and you wait. For 3 years, I became his biggest supporter, his most loyal team member, the reliable Thea who stayed late, who laughed at his jokes, who never questioned his vision. I made myself indispensable but unthreatening. I became the woman executives like Vance loved, competent enough to make him look good, compliant enough to never make him feel insecure, all while I documented everything, every inconsistency in his reporting, every manipulated metric, every inflated projection, every inappropriate comment, every female employee whose idea he stole and presented as his own. I built the case no one else could build because no one else was paying attention. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed leverage. I needed him vulnerable. I needed him to make a mistake so big that even his protectors couldn't ignore it. That's where the proposal came in. For 4 months, I developed the perfect project. A content initiative that addressed everything the board had been pushing for international expansion, younger demographics, cross-platform integration, decreased production costs. It was bulletproof. Brilliant, even. I also knew Vance would reject it immediately. Not because it wasn't good, it was excellent, but because it came from me, and because he already had a similar project in development with his friend Brendan from his old company. A project that was, let's just say, significantly less developed than mine. So, I created 2 versions. The official one, the one I presented to Vance in that meeting, was solid but included one tiny flaw, deliberately placed on page 47, a page I knew he'd never reach. A small but significant miscalculation in the international revenue projections. The second version, the real one, was flawless, and I'd already shared it, confidentially, with 2 board members 3 weeks before the meeting with Vance. Not directly, of course. Through Karina Yaboa, our CFO, one of the few female executives who'd survived Vance's purge because her family connections made her untouchable. She'd reviewed my numbers, recognized what I was really doing, and made the introductions. Be careful, she told me. Men like Vance don't fall easily, and they don't fall alone. I knew the risk. I'd calculated it, just like I'd calculated everything else. Vance would reject my proposal. He'd push his friend Brendan's inferior project. The board would compare the two. Questions would be asked. Inconsistencies would emerge. What I didn't anticipate was how it would feel, sitting in that boardroom, watching him dismiss months of work without even reading it. How humiliating it would be. How familiar the shame would feel. The same shame I'd felt my entire career whenever men like him decided I wasn't worth listening to. After I left the meeting, after I finished being sick in the bathroom, I went back to my desk. I worked until midnight. I came in early the next morning. I smiled at Vance in the hallway. I attended his team meeting and took detailed notes. I played my part perfectly. 3 days later, the board requested a special meeting. They wanted to review both proposals, mine and Brendan's, in detail. Vance wasn't worried. He pulled me aside before the meeting. Don't take this personally, Thea. Your proposal just isn't ready for prime time. Maybe in a few years, you'll understand how these decisions are made, but I appreciate your effort. His condescension was so practiced, so comfortable. He truly believed he was being generous, giving me this feedback. I thanked him for his mentorship. I told him I was grateful for the opportunity to learn from someone with his experience. The board meeting had been set for 2:00 in the afternoon. At 1:30, I received a call from Human Resources, asking me to come to their office. My heart skipped a beat. Had Vance somehow found out what I was up to? Had I made a miscalculation? But it wasn't about me. It was about Zara Doshi, a junior creative on my team. 25 years old, first job out of college. Brilliant, innovative, fearless. She'd been reporting directly to Vance for a special project for the past 2 months. She'd filed a sexual harassment complaint that morning. Said Vance had been making increasingly inappropriate comments, then escalated to unwanted touching. Said he'd told her that her career advancement depended on being flexible about working late with him. HR wanted to know if I'd observed anything, if Zara had mentioned anything to me. I told them the truth, that I hadn't known specifics, but that I wasn't surprised. That multiple women had experienced similar behavior but had been too afraid to report it. Then I opened my laptop and showed them my documentation. 3 years of detailed notes, dates, times, witnesses, emails, recordings of meetings where he'd made inappropriate comments, screenshots of text messages he'd sent to female employees at 2 a.m. The HR director, Imani Moore, stared at me. "You've been collecting this for 3 years? Why didn't you report it sooner?" "Would you have believed me?" I asked. "Would you have protected me? Or would I have been another restructured position?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I missed the board meeting, spent 4 hours in HR instead. When I finally emerged, the building was buzzing. Vance had been escorted out. Security had watched him clean out his office. No explanation given, just whispers and speculation. I went home, turned off my phone, and slept for 14 hours straight. The weight of 3 years of vigilance, of performative loyalty, of suppressed rage, it crashed down on me all at once. I felt hollow, empty. When I returned to work the next day, the board chair, Eleanor Reeves, was waiting in my office. I thought I was next to be fired. Instead, she closed the door and said, "We owe you an apology." The board had compared the proposals and immediately recognized the superiority of mine. They'd questioned Vance about the discrepancies, about why he'd dismissed it so quickly. He'd become defensive, then angry. He'd made comments about emotional women and their inability to understand business realities. Then Eleanor had received a call from HR about Zara's complaint and my documentation. The meeting had been adjourned. Emergency executive sessions had been called. Legal had been consulted. "Vance Harrington no longer works for this company," Eleanor told me. "His employment has been terminated for cause. No severance, no recommendations. And we've opened investigations into each of the departures you documented." I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. So tired. "What happens now?" I asked her. "Now," she said, "we'd like you to take Vance's position. Effective immediately." I almost laughed. 3 years of planning, of documentation, of careful strategy, and they thought I wanted his job? That this was about career advancement? "No," I said. "I don't want his position. I want structural change. I want accountability. I want restoration for the women whose careers he destroyed. I want Lila's family to receive the compensation she was denied. I want a complete overhaul of how this company handles harassment and discrimination." Eleanor looked surprised. "That's ambitious." "So is doubling market share in 36 months, I replied. "But unlike Vance, I have the actual plan to do it. It's in the proposal he didn't bother to read." I pushed a folder across the desk to her. Not my original proposal, a new one. A comprehensive plan for transforming the company's culture, reporting structures, and accountability mechanisms. A blueprint for making our workplace not just more diverse, but more just. "You've been planning this for a long time," she said, scanning the document. "Since the day my friend Lila called me sobbing," I confirmed. "This was never about Vance Harrington. He's just a symptom. I'm interested in curing the disease." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Present this to the full board tomorrow, 9 a.m. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from a strange sense of emptiness. The target of my focus for 3 years was gone, but the system that created him remained. The real work was just beginning, and I wasn't sure I had the strength for it. My phone rang at midnight. It was Karina, the CFO. "I heard what happened," she said. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "It doesn't feel like I thought it would." "It never does," she said softly. "Revenge isn't the same as justice, but sometimes it's the only path to get there." "What if the board rejects my proposal tomorrow?" I asked. "What if they think removing Vance was enough?" "Then you'll have decisions to make," she replied. "But you won't make them alone. There are more of us than you think, Thea." women who've been waiting for someone brave enough to strike the first blow. The next morning, I stood in front of the board, 12 people, 10 of them men, and presented my vision for transforming the company. Not just addressing harassment, but reimagining our entire power structure, new reporting mechanisms, independent reviews of all terminations from the past 3 years, restoration funds for employees who'd been pushed out, transparent salary bands, mentorship programs, accountability metrics tied to executive compensation. I expected resistance. What I didn't expect was silence. Complete, unnerving silence when I finished speaking. Finally, board member Richard Kenton cleared his throat. Ms. Lockwood, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, this proposal represents a fundamental restructuring of how we operate. It would be extremely costly, time-consuming, and frankly, unnecessary. We've removed the problem. Vance Harrington is gone. I looked him directly in the eyes. Mr. Kenton, Vance Harrington was never the problem. He was a symptom. The problem is sitting in this room. You could hear a pin drop. Eleanor, the board chair, looked like she was holding her breath. For 3 years, I continued, Vance Harrington systematically removed qualified women from this company, 7 executives with a combined 102 years of experience, dozens more at lower levels. He harassed, belittled, and blocked the advancement of female employees while promoting less qualified men, and every person in this room let it happen. That's an outrageous accusation, another board member, Terrence Wilson, interrupted. We had no knowledge. You had quarterly turnover reports, I cut in, exit interview data, anonymous employee surveys showing plummeting morale among female staff. You had every piece of information you needed to see the pattern. You chose not to see it because Vance was delivering the numbers you wanted. I placed a USB drive on the table. This contains my resignation letter, effective immediately, along with all my documentation of discriminatory practices at this company over the past 3 years. I've accepted a position at the investigative news platform that will be reporting on this story next week. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to get ahead of it, to announce comprehensive reforms before you're forced to by public pressure. The room erupted. Some were shouting, some were calling legal, some were trying to talk over each other. Eleanor banged her gavel repeatedly, finally restoring order. Ms. Lockwood, she said carefully, are you threatening this company with negative press if we don't implement your proposal? I shook my head. No, Ms. Reeves. I'm informing you of what's already in motion. The story runs whether you act or not. 7 women have already gone on record, including me. 32 more have provided anonymous statements. The reporter has my complete documentation. I'm not threatening you. I'm offering you a chance to be on the right side of this story. I reached into my bag and pulled out a second folder. This is a press release announcing your commitment to implementing these reforms, along with a public apology to the women affected by discrimination at this company. If you choose to issue it today, I'll call the reporter and tell her you're taking responsibility and making changes. The story will still run, but it will include your response and commitment to reform. I stood up, gathered my things, and walked to the door. You have until 5 p.m. After that, I can no longer influence the direction of the story. As I turned the handle, Eleanor spoke. Thea, wait. Please stay. The board needs to discuss this privately. I nodded and left, closing the door behind me. I went directly to my office, packed my personal items, and emailed my team a brief resignation notice. I didn't explain why. They'd know soon enough. As I was leaving, Zara, the young creative who'd filed the harassment complaint, caught up with me in the hallway. Is it true? She asked breathlessly. Are you quitting? I nodded. It's time. Because of me? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I reported Vance? I put down my box and took her hands. No, Zara. Because of me. Because I've been fighting the wrong battle. Removing Vance was necessary, but not sufficient. The company needs deeper change, and I can force that change more effectively from the outside than from within. But we need you here, she insisted. Who's going to protect us if you leave? That question hit me hard. Who indeed? I'd been so focused on my mission, on avenging Lila, that I hadn't fully considered the vacuum my departure would create. You'll protect each other, I told her. And hopefully, after today, you'll have new systems in place that don't rely on a single person standing between you and predators like Vance. She looked unconvinced but nodded. Then she hugged me, whispering, "Thank you for believing me." I barely made it to my car before breaking down. 3 years of pent-up emotion crashed over me in waves. Grief for Lila, rage at Vance, fear about what came next, relief that it was finally over. By 4:30 in the afternoon, I still hadn't heard anything from the board. I was sitting in a coffee shop, staring at my phone, wondering whether I'd miscalculated. What if they had called my bluff? What if they'd decided that enduring a wave of negative press was better than agreeing to the reforms I had proposed? At precisely 4:47, my phone rang. It was Eleanor. "The press release will go out at 5, she said, getting straight to the point. "There are some adjustments to the timeline for implementation, but the core of the reforms stays the same. We're also announcing an independent review of every executive departure during Vance's time in charge, and will ensure proper compensation for anyone who was wrongfully terminated." I closed my eyes, relief washing over me. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she replied, her voice strained. "This should have happened years ago. We failed, I failed, to see what was happening. The cost of that failure is immeasurable." There was a pause, then she continued, "The board has also accepted your resignation, effective immediately, with 6 months severance. However, we'd like to retain you as a consultant to help implement these changes. You've clearly thought this through more thoroughly than anyone else." "I hadn't expected that. I'll consider it," I said cautiously, "but only if Karina Yaboa leads the implementation committee. She has the institutional knowledge and moral compass to make this work." "Already done," Eleanor confirmed. "She's been named interim director while we search for Vance's permanent replacement. Though I suspect that search may be unnecessary if she wants the position." We wrapped up the call, and I immediately phoned Marisa Gallo, the investigative reporter who'd been working on the story. I explained the board's decision and sent her the press release they'd be issuing. "This is unexpected," she admitted. "Companies usually deny, then damage control. They don't often get ahead of stories like this." "This board is learning," I said. "Slowly, painfully, but learning." "We're still running the piece," she warned me. "Their commitment is significant, but the history of what happened under Vance is still news." "I'm counting on it," I told her. "Accountability requires both internal reform and external pressure. The story ensures they won't backslide once the spotlight moves on." The article ran 3 days later. It was comprehensive, devastating, and fair. It detailed Vance's pattern of discrimination and harassment, the company's failure to intervene, and the human cost to the women whose careers he'd destroyed. It included the statement from the board, their commitment to reforms, and quotes from current and former employees. My phone didn't stop ringing for days. Former colleagues thanking me, journalists seeking follow-ups, industry connections offering jobs. I declined most calls, focusing instead on processing what had happened and what came next. A week after the story broke, I visited Lila's grave. It was a clear autumn day, leaves crunching beneath my feet as I approached the simple headstone. I placed white lilies, her favorite, against the cold marble and sat on the ground beside her. "It's done," I told her. "He's gone. And more importantly, things are changing. Not fast enough, not completely enough, but changing. I wish you were here to see it." I stayed for an hour, talking to her as if she could hear me, telling her everything that had happened, explaining that I'd taken the consulting role to ensure the reforms were properly implemented, admitting that I still felt hollow despite the victory. As I was leaving, my phone buzzed with a text from Karina. "Restructuring committee meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. We're reviewing all terminations under Vance, starting with Lila's. Need you there." I replied immediately. "I'll be there." The next 6 months were the hardest work I'd ever done, dismantling entrenched systems of power, rebuilding reporting structures, creating real accountability, fighting resistance from those who benefited from the old ways, supporting women who were finally telling their stories. It wasn't perfect. Some reforms were watered down. Some executives resigned rather than adapt. Some damage couldn't be undone. But we made real, substantive change. We created pathways for advancement that didn't depend on the whims of men like Vance. We built protection mechanisms that didn't rely on individuals being brave enough to risk everything. 4 of the 7 women Vance had pushed out returned to the company, including Renata Okafor, who became the new chief content officer. The others received settlements and public apologies. None of it could bring Lila back, but her family received both financial compensation and something perhaps more valuable acknowledgement of the wrong done to their daughter. Vance himself? He found the industry suddenly closed to him. No major company would touch him after the story broke. Last I heard, he was trying to launch his own venture, struggling to find investors willing to back him despite his proven track record. As for me, when my consulting contract ended, I didn't return to the company. Instead, I started a consulting firm specializing in workplace culture transformation. Companies facing similar issues or hoping to prevent them hired us to assess their systems and implement changes. It wasn't the career path I'd imagined for myself. I'd loved creative strategy, loved building content that connected with audiences. But this work making workplaces safer, fairer, more human it filled the hollow space inside me in a way my previous work never had. 3 years after that fateful board meeting, I was invited to speak at an industry conference about transforming workplace culture. As I waited backstage, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find Zara Doshi, now a rising executive at our former company, leading their most successful content division. "I still think about that day in the hallway," she said, hugging me tightly. "When I asked who would protect us if you left. You were right. We learned to protect each other. But you showed us how." She handed me a small box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a door key. "For opening doors," she explained. "Not just for yourself, but for all of us who followed." I couldn't speak, my throat too tight with emotion. I simply hugged her again, the bracelet clutched in my palm. When I took the stage minutes later, I wore it proudly on my wrist, a reminder that revenge might have been my starting point, but justice, true, systemic justice, had become my purpose. It's been 5 years now since I walked out of that boardroom with my box of office supplies and a plan to force change from the outside. The company has transformed in ways I never thought possible. Not perfect, no workplace is, but fundamentally different. Women now hold 47% of executive positions. Reporting mechanisms function as designed. Accountability is real and consistent. And me? I've helped 23 companies implement similar reforms. I've testified before state legislatures on workplace protection laws. I've mentored dozens of women navigating toxic environments, teaching them to document, strategize, and fight effectively. Sometimes people ask if I regret not taking Vance's position when it was offered to me. If I wouldn't have had more impact from the inside. Maybe. But I needed to break free of that system to see it clearly. To understand that changing the person in the chair isn't enough if the chair itself sits in a broken room. I still think about Lila every day. Still visit her grave with white lilies. Still wonder what she would think of the changes we've made. Still wish she had lived to see Vance fall, to see the system that protected him begin to crumble. That's my story. Not a simple revenge tale, though it started that way. A reminder that sometimes justice requires strategic patience, that systemic problems demand systemic solutions, that transforming power structures is hard, messy, imperfect work, but possible, always possible. I adjust my bracelet, the key charm catching the light. If you're watching this and facing your own Vance Harrington, know that you're not alone. That documentation is power. That strategic patience isn't surrender. That collective action is stronger than individual heroics. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button so others can find it too. Subscribe to the channel for more discussions about workplace transformation and justice. And leave a comment sharing your own experiences. Building community around these issues is how we create lasting change. Someone once told me that revenge isn't the same as justice, but sometimes it's the only path to get there. I'd add this: revenge might be personal, but justice is collective. And in that collection of voices, of experiences, of determined actions, that's where true transformation begins. I touch the key charm one last time. Thank you for listening, for bearing witness, for being part of this ongoing journey toward workplaces where talent and character matter more than power and gender. We're not there yet, but we're on our way.